I'm sure you're aware of the controversy that broke out over some comments Trump made about Milwaukee, which is, of course, hosting the Republican convention coming up later this summer. It was reported he called Milwaukee a horrible city. This obviously isn't a new thing for him. He called Washington a filthy and crime-ridden embarrassment. He's called Chicago worse than Afghanistan. He once called Baltimore a disgusting rat and rodent-infested mess. I mean, these are America's cities. What do you make of his comments and what's driving it?
Well, this is the spirit of the man, and we got to understand this. This is a person who doesn't love America. He demeans and degrades some of our most precious, beloved places. And when he demeans and degrades the places, he demeans and degrades the people that live there, the people that dedicate themselves to teaching in our schools, the firefighters, the police officers, the civic engineers. So many of these cities, I was a mayor of one, went through decades of losing population, losing investment. But there are cities all over America now that are standing back up, having investment come in, businesses move back to city centers, really exciting stories of promise. We don't need a president that punches down, that beats up, that divides us against each other, that degrades people and places. And it's just disheartening to see one of our major political parties elevating someone who doesn't celebrate America. I mean, the rhetoric of Ronald Reagan, of George Bush Sr., I mean, they were about celebrating this country, lifting this country up, seeing it for what it is. When I came to Newark, I moved into a really tough neighborhood, and I was sobered by some of the challenges that Newark was going through at the time and the neighborhood. And this great tenant leader challenged me, and she said, "Boy, you need to understand something. The world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you." And she really challenged me to open my eyes and see the potential and the possibility, the hope and the dignity of the people. And I'll never forget that. And Donald Trump is really telling the story of who he is, not the story of who Milwaukee is.
Such a good point. It's a reminder. I mean, one of the things that's challenging about the politics, Senator, is there's just a lot to run against here. And I wanted to ask you about Trump's conviction and the politics surrounding that as well, because Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker said this about the conviction. He said, quote, "This is also what I believe is important to most Americans, particularly those in the middle who are ultimately going to decide this election." And I raise this because there's a lot to run against. I mean, do you share that belief that Trump being a convicted felon could be the most important factor for undecided voters at this point?
Again, I'm not sure. I'm obviously looking at focus group details. What I've seen, the evidence that moves people the most is the extraordinary achievements of the Biden administration that most Americans aren't aware of, what he's accomplished. This is a president that has a pathway. But I'm going to be one of those guys campaigning all over this country, not only speaking to the bright light and positive accomplishments of this president, but I'm going to try to remind people of who Donald Trump is in his own words or his own actions. And yeah, not only has he had 34 felony convictions, he is a convicted felon, but he has 2 pending federal felony indictments, both for interfering with an election, as well as how he's handled classified documents that endanger our national security. He's got a state felony conviction in Georgia, but that's not all. This guy has also been found by the New York Supreme Court. Him and his organization have been found liable and fined $450 million. The despicable and disgusting things he did to E. Jean Carroll. He's been fined tens of millions of dollars. Even his charitable activities were exposed by a judge to have been corrupt, and for his own personal benefit, he was forced to disband his charitable activities and pay, again, millions of dollars. Everything he has done in every aspect of his life, business, personal, charity, has now been by federal criminal and civil courts, state and federal criminal and civil courts, has been resoundingly condemned, and he has had to pay out millions of dollars of fines. This is a pattern and practice of who he is. He brought the greatest shame to our country. The only time that our capital has ever been taken over by a mob or violence was in 1814 due to the War of 1812, and again under his presidency. And so to me, it's both. It's understanding the truth and the successes of a president who served under one of the most difficult times of service, took over our country when it was on the brink after Donald Trump's presidency and the pandemic, and has brought us some of the greatest success, especially relative to other nations, other peers, best economy on the globe right now in terms of economic growth, and then compared to what Donald Trump was, what Donald Trump has done in every area of his life.
You said, Senator, you have a lot going on, I think it's fair to say. You said on the Judiciary Committee, and I wanted to just ask you about the Supreme Court, because it seems like every week, and it seems like it's growing in recent weeks, there's a new scandal. There's Samuel Alito and the flags outside his homes. There were the tapes released this week of Alito sounding awfully partisan, I think it's fair to say. Your committee also reported this week that Justice Clarence Thomas took more trips than we knew about on a Republican megadonor's private plane. I mean, I could go on, but I'll stop there. This feels a bit like a crisis to me. I mean, would you like to see the Senate hear from some of these justices directly, or would you be open to subpoenaing them if necessary? There's not a lot of precedent for that, but we're in unprecedented times.
Well, a lot of these billionaires and these activists who've been trying for decades to capture our courts and have been obviously successful in influencing them, these billionaires who are taking people on these trips, folks like Harlan Crow and others, yeah, we've been trying to call them before the Senate. And the fact that this has fallen into the traditional partisan left-right divide is absolutely outrageous and unacceptable. This is not about partisanship. This is the fact that the highest court in the land should have the highest ethical standards, not the lowest. The fact that senators in Congress have higher ethical standards on our behavior than the Supreme Court, which literally the whole idea of avoiding appearances of impropriety is literally written into judicial ethics. The fact that now we've had people like Clarence Thomas receiving millions of dollars worth of perks and benefits from billionaires who have strong right ideological bents, who have deep investments in the outcome of court cases is absolutely unacceptable and should be resoundingly condemned by all Americans. This is a crisis of our institution, and the justices involved who are not even willing to recuse themselves, like in the case of Alito, it's just shameful. And so we're going to continue to speak out about this. We're going to continue to call out the truth and to try to use the Judiciary Committee ultimately to bring about the change that all Americans on both sides of the aisle really do want, which is that our highest court in the land should have the highest ethical standards and judges that abide by it.
I mean, to your point, they're continuing to hand down opinions, right, as this ethics crisis unfolds. I mean, on Friday, they overturned a ban on bump stocks, which are used, for those who aren't aware, to make semi-automatic rifles fire more quickly. So there's a bit of a credibility, not just a bit, there is a credibility crisis here. Also, clearly, a bit of an extremism crisis. What's your reaction? You've done so much and spoken out about gun violence, to that decision on bump stocks.
The worst mass shooting in American history, all of our country's history, was a man with a bump stock that over 11 minutes fired over 1,000 rounds. That bump stock allowed him to convert his weapon into a mass-firing, multiple-round shooting gun that wounded over 500 people, killing 58. It was a horrific incident. My mom lives in Vegas. And the terror and the horror of that incident compelled President Trump to call for the ban of bump stocks. I think that Sotomayor in her dissent was right. It walks like a duck. It talks like a duck. It looks like a duck. It is like converting a weapon to effectively a machine gun, which are banned. And so this is startling that we have a Supreme Court so out of step with our country. This is not controversial. People on the left and the right, a Republican president, called for the end of these devices in the wake of the worst mass shooting in our country, the horrors that it brought about. This should not be allowed in our nation.
No question. I know every day I'm scared a bit when my kids are sent off to school, given how available these guns are and bump stocks across the country. I want to ask you about IVF, because this has become an issue that has Unfortunately, it shouldn't be controversial. It's quite popular, IVF. Millions of women, so many women are able to have children because of it. You introduced a bill this week to codify IVF protections. It got a vote this week. It failed. And I think it's important, again, to restate how popular IVF is. It makes people able to be parents. All but 2 Republicans voted against it. For people wondering out there, what the heck is going on? Why would anyone oppose this? Why did all these Republicans vote against your bill?
Well, remember, when it comes to women's reproductive rights, writ large, in our nation, Democrats, Republicans, and independents all agree that this erosion of reproductive rights is unacceptable. And the majority of Americans believe in Roe v. Wade. The majority of Americans believe that people should have access to mifepristone. And the majority of Americans, overwhelmingly, upwards of 90%, say that we should have access to IVF. And our legislation was very basic. It said, number one, we need to protect these rights at a time, as we saw in Alabama, that extremist groups in legislatures and on the bench are trying to take them away. Number two, it said that IVF, which is very expensive, the miracle of having children should not be accessible only to the wealthy or to people that can find a way to pay the $10,000 to $20,000, and that simply more insurance carriers should cover that. And then finally, in a way that should have compelled more people to stand up and support it, is that military folks who are going off to service, often exposing themselves to conditions or injuries that could prevent them from having children, we should support our military personnel to freeze their sperm or their eggs and have access to this kind of treatment that can enable them and their families, often families that have 2, 3, 4, 5 generations of military service. We should allow them to also be able to access the dream of having children should they need IVF. It's a basic bill. And this was stopped in its tracks, didn't even get a debate in Congress by Republicans who do not represent writ large Republican sentiment. And so we are in a crisis in this country. And so we're going to continue to stand up and fight for women's reproductive rights. It is really going to play out in this election. What kind of people are we going to elect? Will you support the party and the people that are taking away individual freedoms and reproductive rights, or will we join together and protect them by electing people who will stand up for those reproductive rights?
Senator Cory Booker, that issue is on the minds, I know, of so many people out there, and so important to remind people that IVF is at risk, mifepristone is at risk, your rights to potentially birth control is at risk. It's not just jobs. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining me. I really appreciate all of the work you've done and the time you've taken to talk to me about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.